What happens when a light, easygoing morning interview suddenly turns into one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television? When a music icon walks into a studio expecting album buzz and friendly chatter only to be blindsided by questions she never agreed to answer. And when a host refuses to read the room, ignoring every signal to change course. This is the story of how Gwen Stefani walked off the Today Show. And trust me, you'll want to hear exactly how this unfolded. Because what began as a routine album promotion spiraled into something nobody in that studio saw coming. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me whether you think the host crossed the line. Because once you hear the full story, you're going to have strong opinions. The studio lights were bright, just like any other Tuesday morning. The atmosphere felt relaxed, familiar business as usual. Gwen Stefani sat across from host Sarah Mitchell with the polished confidence of someone who's spent decades in front of cameras. She smiled easily, at home in the setting. The interview started exactly as expected. Sarah asked about Gwen's new album, her creative process, what fans could look forward to on the upcoming tour. Gwen was animated and warm, sharing stories about late-night recording sessions and the collaborators who helped shape the sound. She laughed, she leaned in. Everything felt normal. Then Sarah shifted in her chair. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Her posture changed, her tone followed. And suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. "Gwen," Sarah said, leaning forward. Slightly, her voice turning sharper. "I want to talk about something that's been circulating online for the past few weeks." The casual energy was gone. "There have been some pointed comments from your former bandmates," Sarah continued, "specifically about creative control and who really drove the direction of No Doubt during its peak years. Some people are saying you've rewritten history a bit in recent interviews. What's your response to that?" For just a split second, Gwen's smile faltered. Off camera, her publicist tensed. This wasn't on the approved list. The pre-interview agreement had been clear. New music, the tour, light personal topics. Band drama from decades ago was explicitly off limits. "Well," Gwen said evenly. Though a new edge had crept into her voice, "I think anyone who is actually there understands what the dynamic was. I've always been incredibly grateful for my time with the band and for everything we created together. We were young, we were figuring things out, and we made something special. I don't believe there's any history that needs rewriting." It was a graceful answer, a clear invitation to move on. Sarah didn't. She nodded, but instead of pivoting, she pressed harder. "That's interesting," Sarah said, "because in a podcast last month, Tony made some very specific claims about songwriting credits and decision-making. He suggested there were songs where your contribution was more about performance than creation. And he's not the only one saying this. So do you think there's been a misunderstanding about your role, or are they just remembering things differently than you are?" The smile was gone now. Gwen's jaw tightened. She took a measured breath. Media training kicked in, but the surprise and frustration were impossible to hide. "I think everyone is entitled to their own memories," Gwen said carefully. "But I was there for every song, every decision, every late night and early morning. I poured my heart into that music, and anyone questioning that wasn't in the room with us. I don't think this is the time or place to relitigate band dynamics from decades ago, especially when I'm here to talk about new music I'm truly excited about." It was a boundary, clear, direct. Any seasoned interviewer would have taken it. Sarah didn't. "I hear that," she replied, "but I think viewers are curious because this speaks to something bigger: authenticity. Giving credit where it's due. And when multiple people from the same band say similar things, it makes people wonder. So I have to ask, do you feel you've been completely honest about your contributions? Or is there some ego involved in how you remember those years?" The word ego landed hard. Off camera, Gwen's publicist stood and made a clear-cutting motion toward the producers. "Stop this." Now, but they were livened. Sarah still held the floor. Gwen's voice stayed controlled. But the frustration finally broke through. "Sarah, I've been honest about my life and my career," she said. "I've spoken openly about collaboration, about growth, about mistakes. But what you're doing right now feels less like journalism and more like provocation. I came here in good faith to talk about my work. Instead, I'm being ambushed with talking points from interviews I haven't even heard." "I'm just asking what the audience wants to know," Sarah shot back, defensive now. "This is live television. Real conversations. People appreciate when we dig deeper instead of doing puff pieces. You're a public figure. That comes with uncomfortable questions." "There's a difference," Gwen replied sharply, "between uncomfortable and disrespectful. Between tough questions and blindsiding someone's character. None of this was mentioned beforehand. Your producers told my team this was about the album. If you wanted a gotcha interview, you should have been up front." The tension was thick enough to feel. Crew members exchanged uneasy looks. Unsure whether to intervene, Sarah still refused to back down. "I don't think asking about public statements from former collaborators is a gotcha," she said. "These comments are out there. Viewers deserve to hear your response. Isn't that fair?" Gwen reached up and subtly adjusted her microphone, as if weighing whether to remove it entirely. She locked eyes with Sarah Dott, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but unmistakably firm. "What's fair," Gwen said, "is honoring the agreements that were made before someone sits down in your chair. What's fair," Gwen said evenly, "is treating your guests with basic respect. What's fair is understanding that just because something is public doesn't mean it's appropriate to weaponize it, especially in an interview that was supposed to celebrate new work." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You want to talk about fairness?" she continued. "Then let's talk about you using the words of people I once trusted to try and embarrass me on national television." Sarah's expression hardened. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I'm trying to have an honest conversation." "Then have one," Gwen replied, her tone calm but immovable. "Don't dress up an ambush as honesty. You know exactly what you're doing. You booked me under one set of expectations, put me in this chair, and now you're fishing for a viral moment at my expense. That isn't journalism, Sarah. It's something else." Sarah recalibrated, her voice shifting into a soft, almost sympathetic register. "I think you're being a bit defensive, and I wonder if that's because there may be some truth to what's being said. If none of it were true, wouldn't it be easier to address it and move on? The fact that you're reacting so emotionally suggests there's more going on here." That word landed like a switch being flipped. "Emotional," Gwen repeated, her eyes narrowing. There was ice in her voice now. "So now we're doing that thing where a woman sets boundaries and suddenly she's emotional." "I'm not emotional, Sarah. I'm clear. I'm clear that this interview was misrepresented. I'm clear that you're more interested in conflict than conversation. And I'm clear that you aren't actually interested in my answers, interested in sound bites that make me look bad." "That's not true," Sarah said quickly, though her body language betrayed her. She glanced down at her notes, searching for her next angle. "I think you're mischaracterizing what I'm trying to do. Let me ask you this, and I genuinely want your perspective. When you went solo, a lot of people felt you left the band behind in a way that was hurtful. Do you think you could have handled that transition differently? Do you have any regrets?" Gwen let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Are you serious right now? You're asking me if I regret having a solo career? If I regret pursuing my own artistic vision?" "I'm asking if you regret how you did it," Sarah clarified, but the distinction rang hollow now. "Because there's a pattern here, Gwen. Over the years, multiple people you've worked with have said they felt sidelined or undervalued. At some point, doesn't that become something you need to look at about yourself? The audacity of it stunned Gwen into silence for just a moment. She stared at Sarah as if trying to process whether this was really happening, or whether she'd stepped into some alternate reality where morning show hosts casually psychoanalyze their guests based on gossip. "You don't know me," Gwen said finally, her voice dangerously quiet. "You don't know my relationships. You don't know the private conversations I've had with people I care about. You don't know the complexity of making hard career decisions while trying to preserve friendships and creative partnerships." She held Sarah's gaze. "You're sitting there with talking points and gotcha questions, acting like you have insight into my character based on what edited podcast clips and tabloid narratives." "I'm basing it on what people who actually know you have said publicly," Sarah replied. "And I think that matters. When multiple people say similar things, it's worth examining. You can't dismiss everyone as having an agenda." "I'm not dismissing anyone," Gwen said, her patience finally snapping. "But I am refusing to sit here and defend myself against vague accusations and third-hand character assassinations." Her voice sharpened. "You want to talk about patterns? Let's talk about the pattern of women in this industry being held to impossible standards. Let's talk about the pattern of female artists being scrutinized in ways male artists never are. Let's talk about interviews like this, where a woman comes in to promote her work and instead gets interrogated about her personality, whether she's nice enough, humble enough, agreeable enough." Sarah's expression tightened. "Now you're turning this into a gender issue." "This is about accountability. It's about both." Gwen shot back instantly. "And if you can't see how gender is shaping the way you're speaking to me right now, then you're either incredibly naive or deliberately ignoring it." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you think you'd be using words like emotional, defensive, or ego if I were a man sitting in this chair? Do you really believe you'd be asking these questions the same way?" "I'd ask anyone these questions," Sarah insisted, but the certainty in her voice was gone. "This isn't about you being a woman. It's about you being a public figure people have legitimate questions about." "Legitimate?" Gwen shot back. "According to whom?" "According to you." "According to producers who saw an opportunity to boost ratings by turning what was supposed to be a promotional interview into a public trial." She didn't pause. "I've been in this industry for 30 years, Sarah. I've done thousands of interviews. I know the difference between tough questions and hostile interrogation. And this," she gestured lightly between them, "is hostile." The discomfort in the studio was impossible to miss. Crew members avoided eye contact, communicating silently with raised brows and tense expressions. The segment producer was on her phone, clearly receiving instructions from higher-ups as the situation unraveled in real time. Sarah pushed forward anyway. "I really don't think you're being fair to me," she said, wounded now. "I'm doing my job." "I'm asking what people want," answered. "And if you're not willing to engage with that, maybe you're not ready to be doing interviews at all." That did it. Gwen stared at her, disbelief replacing frustration. "You're questioning whether I'm ready to do interviews?" Her voice stayed steady, but the authority behind it was unmistakable. "I've been answering hard questions since before you were probably in journalism school. I've been challenged. I've been criticized. And I've always shown up with professionalism. What you're doing isn't journalism, it's entertainment at someone else's expense. And I'm not participating anymore, so you're just shutting down," Sarah said quickly, desperation creeping into her tone. She could feel control slipping away. "You're refusing to have a real conversation?" "I'm not shutting down," Gwen replied, calmly, almost eerily so. "I'm setting a boundary. I'm saying no. I'm saying I don't have to sit here and be disrespected just because you have a microphone." She leaned back slightly. Real conversations require good faith. They require mutual respect. They require listening instead of waiting for your turn to attack. And we don't have any of that here. Sarah tried one last time. "Gwen, if you just take a breath and really listen, you'd see I'm giving you an opportunity." These aren't attacks. They're chances to set the record straight. Isn't that what you want? Gwen stood. The movement wasn't dramatic. It was decisive. She reached up, removed her microphone with steady hands, and placed it neatly on the chair. The soft click echoed in the suddenly silent studio. When she looked at Sarah, her face was resolved. "What I want," Gwen said, her voice carrying across the room, "is basic human decency. And since that seems to be too much to ask for here, I'm done." Sarah's face flickered shock, panic, anger. "Gwen, wait. We're live. You can't just walk off. We still have 4 minutes." "Watch me," Gwen replied, calmly, almost relieved. "You can fill those 4 minutes however you like. Maybe you can explain to viewers why ambushing guests is acceptable. Maybe you can reflect on how this interview went so wrong. That's your choice." "This is incredibly unprofessional," Sarah snapped, her composure cracking. "You agreed to be here? You made a commitment and now you're leaving because you didn't like the questions." Gwen turned back, slower this time, colder. "You want to talk about unprofessional," she said. "Let's talk about lying to someone's team. Let's talk about blindsiding a guest with hostile questions they never agreed to answer. Let's talk about using personal relationships as weapons for ratings." She met Sarah's eyes. "You broke the agreement the moment you chose conflict over integrity. So don't lecture me about professionalism when you abandoned it first." "I didn't lie," Sarah protested weakly. "You're a public figure. Public scrutiny comes with the job." "No," Gwen said, stepping closer, not threatening, just final. "Being a public figure means people are interested in my work. It doesn't mean I surrender my dignity. Doesn't mean I owe you my silence while you twist my life into spectacle." Her voice lowered. "You've confused access with entitlement. And that's your problem, not mine." The studio had gone completely still. Cameras continued to roll, broadcasting every second to millions at home. Sarah made one last plea. "Gwen, please, let's reset. We can talk about the album. I'm willing to move past this." "That's generous," Gwen replied coolly. "But I'm not interested in moving past this. I'm interested in moving on." She paused at the edge of the set. There's a difference. Moving past it means pretending it didn't happen. And then she walked off. "Pretending," Gwen said calmly, "means I ignore what you just showed me, who you are and what you're willing to do for a story. Moving on means I walk out of here. I don't come back. And I make sure people understand why." "You're going to trash this show?" Sarah asked. For the first time, real fear crept into her voice. She finally seemed to grasp the consequences. "I'm going to tell the truth," Gwen corrected. "I'm going to explain how I was misled, how I was ambushed, how I was treated once the cameras were rolling. And if that makes the show look bad," she shrugged slightly. "Maybe the show should have thought about that before deciding to treat a guest this way." She held Sarah's gaze. "You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." Sarah's face flushed, embarrassment and anger colliding. "Fine, walk off. Run away from hard questions. Show everyone you can't handle pressure. That really helps your argument about not being defensive or having an ego problem." Gwen smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who just had all their suspicions confirmed. "And there it is," she said quietly. "The real you, not the thoughtful journalist, not the person who wants honest conversation, the version that lashes out the moment control slips away, the one who insults when they don't get what they want." She nodded once. "Thank you for making that so obvious." "Get out then," Sarah snapped. All composure gone. "Go. Leave. See if anyone cares. See if this doesn't follow you for the rest of your career. You think you're making some brave stand? You're just proving you're difficult, entitled, and incapable of handling criticism." Gwen didn't respond. She didn't have to. The contrast between her calm and Sarah's unraveling said everything. She turned and walked toward the edge of the set head high. Steps measured, unhurried. "Commercial. We're going to commercial," someone shouted off camera. Likely the director making the call far too late. But before the feed, cut before the scramble, could fully take over, Gwen stopped and turned back to the camera. To anyone watching, she said clearly, her voice steady and strong, "You deserve better than this kind of television. You deserve interviews that are thoughtful and respectful. You deserve hosts who treat guests like human beings, not props in manufactured drama." She paused. This wasn't an interview. It was an ambush. And I hope you remember that the next time this show asks for your attention. Then she walked off. She disappeared into the wings, leaving Sarah standing alone under the studio lights as the camera finally cut away. The silence afterward was deafening, broken only by the muffled panic behind the scenes as producers scrambled to salvage what was left of the broadcast. Sarah remained frozen for a moment, visibly shaken by how completely the situation had collapsed. What she'd expected to be a sharp, buzz-generating confrontation had instead exposed her methods, alienated her guest, and detonated into a viral moment she couldn't control. In the control room, phones rang non-stop. Clips spread across social media at lightning speed. Some praised Gwen for standing her ground. Others criticized the show's tactics. Executives were almost certainly already in emergency meetings, discussing damage control. And somewhere, Gwen Stefani was likely sitting in a car, leaving the studio behind feeling a complicated mix of frustration, vindication, and relief that she'd finally said what needed to be said. The remaining 4 minutes of the segment were swallowed by an awkward commercial break, followed by a vague statement about technical difficulties. But everyone watching knew the truth. There were no technical issues, only a complete breakdown of trust between interviewer and guest. And that's how Gwen Stefani walked off the Today Show, not in anger, not with theatrics, but with clarity, dignity, and a refusal to be treated as anything less than the accomplished artist and human being she is. Whether you think she was right to leave or should have stayed and pushed through, one thing is undeniable. She made her point in a way no one watching will forget. So what do you think? Was Gwen justified, or should she have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this don't happen every day, and you won't want to miss what comes next.